Hey guys, Marissa here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are at a little bit of a different angle here. I'm actually sitting exactly opposite the way you guys normally face, and we're going to be doing something slightly different today. A little bit experimental, and I'm honestly not quite sure if this video is going to work. The day I'm filming this, it is a Saturday, and although I know I just said I was going to try and work less this year, I actually need to go into the office today. So I obviously need to do something about my face. Not that I don't like my face, but I made the fatal error of falling asleep in my makeup several times this week, so I'm definitely a little broken out. I don't want to just kind of like elevate, you know? I gotta look a little bit professional today, just a tad bit. However, I also really wanted to make time today to talk to you guys about the books that I read for Nonfiction November 2019, which, yes, I realize was a very long time ago now, but I have run out of time. So I thought I would try and do both at the same time, do my makeup and talk to you guys about books. This could go horribly. Anyways, I'm just gonna go ahead and dive right into doing my makeup and chatting at you guys. Let's see how this goes. Hopefully I don't have to completely scrap this video. Oh no, I hit pan. Oh, tiny bit of pan. So the first book I want to talk to you guys about is Shortest Way Home by Pete Buttigieg. Now this is his memoir. This is what I would call his election book, meaning that he released it like right before he announced that he was going to be running for president of the United States in 2020. And it's not like a sellout thing. All candidates tend to do this. Shortest Way Home is, I would say, primarily a memoir of Pete Buttigieg's time as mayor of South Bend, Indiana. However, it also just kind of has a wider "this is who I am" feel. Like, he does talk through his childhood a bit. He talks through college and his time in the military a bit. Back when different Democrats first started announcing that they were going to be running for president, I had this like momentary idea of reading a book by each one of the candidates, you know, to kind of get a better sense of who they are or who they were pre-campaign, because I do feel like campaigning is a bit of taking what you believe in and then changing as the campaign continues, you know, trying to make yourself more electable. However, more and more people kept announcing that they were going to run for president, and I think by the time we hit like peak capacity, I think it was like 26 people, and I thought, you know what, be realistic, that is just not going to happen. So I ended up just kind of looking at the different candidates and thinking, okay, whose book do I actually want to read? And Buttigieg was kind of the only one, which I feel like kind of reveals who my preferred candidate would be. But anyways, I'm not telling you how to vote, not telling you how to live your life. You do you. If you're not a Democrat, that's totally cool too. I just found that I really wanted to read Buttigieg's memoir because, number one, he is so young, and number two, he was not a national figure prior to this election. So I feel like he was the one I knew like the least about. I actually purchased Shortest Way Home back at the beginning of 2019, like in January, I think, and ended up holding on to it. I like couldn't bring myself to read it because I was afraid that if I read it, I would get really, really attached to him, and then he was going to drop out of the race, and I don't know, I was gonna have to figure out who the heck else I was interested in. So I put it off for a very long time. What is that? When's November? 11 months? You guys might be sick of hearing me say this, but one of the reasons I really like listening to memoirs on audio is that a lot of the time, and in my experience, my favorite memoir audiobook experiences are those where the author actually reads the book themselves. I just feel like it's really interesting and really enlightening to hear the author talk about themselves in their own words, because obviously they've written the book, but also to hear the way that they would read it, if that makes any sense. I like hearing the vocal inflections behind a person, and I think Buttigieg was a really natural audiobook reader, audiobook voice. What do you call that? Audiobook actor, voice actor. Now, like I mentioned, it's primarily Buttigieg's memoir of his time as mayor. But what I would definitely say is that it leans far heavier on personal development than it does on like actual policy. So I was slightly disappointed in that sense, in that I don't feel like he really went into detail into policies he tried to enact in the city. He didn't really I don't know how to say this, but he didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of like being an elected official at all. He kind of talked a little bit about like the procedure of his day-to-day life as mayor. He talked a little bit about the procedure of getting elected and getting into politics in the first place, but it wasn't like, hey, I had this economic strategy and this is how we implemented it. It was, when he did talk about policy, it was definitely on a broader scale and it wasn't quite so detailed. So I kind of wish he had been a little bit more detailed in that, given that I was reading it kind of as a way to give me more insight into him as a politician, as a potential president. I really think I would have appreciated to get a little bit more of his thought process behind his different policies, but that could just be me. Overall, though, I found that it was very well written. I was also concerned that it was going to be a little overly, stuffy is not the word, but I was concerned it was going to be slightly pompous, given that he's a Fulbright scholar, he's a Harvard grad. Not pompous, that's not the right word. I was afraid that it was going to be a little inaccessible. There you go. That's a far better way to put it. Thank God I don't work in communications. I was afraid he was going to be inaccessible, not necessarily to myself, because I mean, that also might sound pompous. I consider myself a fairly educated person. I'm literarily educated, so I knew that he and I were going to speak a similar language because he was also a literature student when he was in college. However, I was afraid he was going to be out of touch and kind of inaccessible to the average American, because obviously as a presidential candidate, you can't just win the white educated vote. And I'm kind of including myself in that because I recognize that I have grown up with a lot of privilege in a similar vein to white privilege, even though I'm not, nor do I consider myself white. It was very approachable. I feel like he very much made himself feel a little bit more everyman, in that he talked, because he focused mainly on his own personal development, he talked a lot about growing up, dealing with religion, dealing with this desire to go and join the military after 9/11. He talked about coming out, and having been in this weird position where he had to think about all of those personal decisions in the context of how that would affect his ability to serve his community. So in general, I thought the vast majority of it was very accessible, and I thought it was really interesting actually learning more about his military service. I didn't realize that he decided to, that he actually, when he was deployed to Afghanistan, I didn't realize that he was deployed when he was currently mayor. I thought that was quite fascinating. So overall, I would say that it was a pleasant reading experience. I believe I ended up giving it 5 stars on Goodreads, which is funny that I'm mentioning that because I know I'm not really sharing stars on here much anymore. However, I think in retrospect, I might drop that down to a 3.5 or a 4 because I enjoyed the reading experience. I found it really increased my confidence in him because he seems like a very thoughtful, sincere individual, and that's something I feel like we need in a president. However, like I mentioned, he doesn't really go into the nitty-gritty of how he made certain policy decisions. I was really hoping he would specifically kind of talk about some of the really tough decisions that I know he had to make in regards to race and policing and stuff like that. Did not really go into that at all. So I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity, if I'm completely honest, but it's not a bad book. And it's definitely a worthwhile audiobook experience. So if you are interested in reading about any of the presidential candidates, Democratic presidential candidates who are left in the running, I would say it's not going to be a waste of time to read this book. I just don't think it was as amazing as I was hoping it was going to be. Okay, so then the other book I wanted to talk to you guys about, and I feel like this is so weird to be talking about this book while I'm doing my makeup because it's actually quite heavy, but the other audiobook that I listened to in Nonfiction November last year was Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. Now this is obviously the book that he wrote talking about his experience reporting on kind of the Harvey Weinstein debacle. What are we calling it? The start of the Me Too movement, when he was exposing Harvey Weinstein, when he exposed NBC for trying to squash the reporting. And I just have to reiterate that Ronan Farrow is probably my favorite nonfiction writer at the moment. He, granted, is probably the only nonfiction writer where I've read multiple of his books. I read War and Peace in 2018, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. I've actually read that book 3 times for reference. It's fantastic, and everybody should read it. Anyways, Catch and Kill is about the Harvey Weinstein Me Too NBC issue, and I found it terrifying. I mean, I know that sexual harassment and assault is a thing, and I know that in industries like Hollywood and the media in general, it can be really prevalent because most of the people in power are men. However, I just don't think I ever put like detail to that in my brain, and because Ronan included very detailed descriptions from several of the women he was working with in regard to what actually happened to them, like very detailed, word for word accounts. There were certain moments where I was like, oh wow, I should have been sitting down to listen to that part, and they just kind of sneak up on you. I feel like I shouldn't even need to say this, but I can tell that the reporting that went into both, obviously his Pulitzer Prize winning articles for the New Yorker and for this book was intense. It was just really apparent how much he cared and how much was personally at risk for him. Another thing that I had heard him mention briefly in interviews before but hadn't really understood the gravity of was the fact that he was being followed and threatened. I knew theoretically, again, like, oh yeah, this is this is something that he's talked about. I understand that he was being followed by former Mossad agents, but I guess I didn't really understand that meant that they were like literally camped outside his house and he was getting these weird threatening text messages and weird phone alerts. They were trying to bug his phone. The fact that he had every reason to stop reporting the story and did not just really increase my respect for him as a reporter. And again, I just think that the writing of the book itself is harrowing, it's gripping, it will really open your eyes and make you feel horrible things for these poor women, but it's also totally worth reading. Pausing for 1 second to put on some eyeliner. Something I hadn't really considered going into reading the book was how much it would change my views on NBC, in addition to how NBC squashed reporting on the Harvey Weinstein story. Ronan also talks quite a bit about just the overall culture at NBC and the men in power, and he does touch a little bit on the whole Matt Lauer situation. Now, this might sound weird to those of you who don't grow up in news junkie families, but we are very loyal to NBC in my family. My mom in particular is a huge fan of the Today Show, and growing up, it was the whole benefit of getting up early and getting up in time for school is you actually had time to like watch a little bit of the Today Show before you had to go run out to the bus. Again, I realize that probably sounds really weird if you're not as into the news as my family is, but I have spent a lot of my life watching NBC, supporting NBC network, watching a wide variety of their news programs, and reading or listening to the sections about the culture at NBC and about Matt Lauer in particular just made me so angry. And while I have not stopped watching the network's entertainment program, and while I have not stopped watching my local news on NBC, I have not yet been able to bring myself to watch the Today Show. Yeah, I again did not realize that it would make me feel as guilty and as much like I participated in something, even though I obviously could have had no idea that this was going on unless the network felt so inclined to disclose to us. So I just thought I would share that because that was like an interesting revelation from the book that I was not expecting. Now, something else I really want to touch on, because this was something I heard quite a bit about before going into the audiobook specifically. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing voices in a standard audiobook. It's basically just a narration choice. And obviously whoever directed his recording didn't have a problem with it. And the fact that he had voices for literally every ethnicity of character or every nationality of character makes me think that they were like egging him on in the studio. However, I know that several people could not make it through the audiobook because of said voices, and I know that it was something that I was a little concerned about given how serious the subject matter. I was slightly concerned that the voices would make the book feel not like a mockery, but it would feel just like too awkward a juxtaposition. And I will admit that probably for the first 2 hours of the listening experience, I was like, Ronan, what are you doing? Why are you doing voices? I kind of just got used to it. And to be completely honest, even if he does do voices, his voices aren't bad. Like, he kind of nails every single accent. And the only ones I found particularly cringy were when he was doing different intonations for the different women that he interviewed. I found that in particular was kind of 100% unnecessary. And again, because it was such heavy subject material, I didn't need it. I would just say that if you have let fear of Ronan Farrow doing voices put you off from listening to this audiobook, I would honestly say they weren't that bad. They weren't worth not reading the book for. And actually, if you are a fan of Pod Save America and you are already familiar with his fiance, John Lovett, that's probably the best impersonation or voice in the whole book. He nails Lovett's voice, so that was pretty cool. So that was what I read for Nonfiction November 2019. And overall, I would say it was a pretty good reading experience. I, again, enjoyed the experience of listening to Shortest Way Home by Pete Buttigieg, though I wouldn't say that it was a memoir that has really stuck with me as much as some of the other memoirs that I have read. And when it comes to Catch and Kill, it is a hard listen, so I do want to warn you guys about that. Trigger warnings definitely for sexual harassment, assault, rape, etc. But if you can listen to it, I would highly suggest it. I think it's a really illuminating picture of not necessarily the fact that sexual assault and sexual harassment exists, because if you're a woman especially, we all know that. However, I do think it's a really illuminating picture of the overall social structures that make that continued harassment and assault possible. So I would highly, highly suggest that you read that if you can. And although I haven't planned on doing a favorite reads of 2019 video, I would definitely say that's probably my favorite book. Definitely, probably. Such a California thing to say. That is definitely my favorite book of 2019. And I think that's about it, because I actually have to run out the door. So thank you guys so much for getting ready with me. Thank you for listening to me ramble about books. Thank you to my patrons, and thank you to you guys for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you next time. Bye.